Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of NHLN Opinion Plus, a weekly series airing every Friday. This is a space for our opinions where we talk about current events and questions the Latino community is curious about. Today, we are joined by James Key Wallace, Executive Director of New Hampshire Business Finance Authority. Before he joined the organization in 2016, James was a senior investor at the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund for 8 years. Welcome, James, and thank you for joining us this week.
Good afternoon, Belen. I'm happy to be here.
It's a pleasure. So I was hoping we could start off if you could give us an introduction to New Hampshire Business Finance Authority and your work.
I'd be happy to. So the New Hampshire Business Finance Authority was created in 1992 by an act of the New Hampshire State Legislature. And the mission of the organization is really twofold. One is to ensure that all businesses in New Hampshire, both large and small, have access to loans and investments they need to grow their business and make jobs for our communities. And the other is to make sure that the stability of our commercial credit markets are even through good times and bad, whether it's financial crisis or COVID-19 times or anything in between.
Thank you for that explanation. So seeing as we're approaching the first anniversary of the COVID-19 crisis, how has the pandemic impacted your work in serving local businesses since then?
Yeah, it's been very busy for obvious reasons. COVID-19 has hit a lot of businesses in New Hampshire very hard. What we've seen over the past year is actually somewhat interesting. There were all the initial normal, or I would say normal, maybe expected effects from something like this, where restaurants and hotels were hit particularly hard. Retail establishments, really any place you need to walk in and visit with on your own 2 feet. But as COVID has moved forward and parts of the economy have really started to recover, there's both bright spots and areas that are still struggling. And what I see from my perch is a divide. Larger companies tend to have been recovering more quickly, while a lot of smaller and family-owned enterprises who just didn't have as much backup capital and were more vulnerable to a shock. Those are the ones still struggling, still trying to figure out how we're going to make it through, and still in need of support.
Right. And so that makes complete sense. And so what were the BFA's main priorities throughout 2020, probably with that in mind?
Yeah, it was really about how do we just keep businesses afloat. The economic strategy for New Hampshire during this recovery, was very quick to recognize, no one can get made whole through the losses that we're experiencing. There's just not enough money in the world to do that. But if we can provide relief to the types of businesses that need it, enough just to keep them in the game, that way, when they come out of the other side of this, they're still intact. The owners are still there. The employees are still working. It's much easier for a business to recover from layer down than it is for a bunch of new businesses to try and replace businesses that went under. So the goal through a lot of the CARES Act money that came from the feds and then down through the state of New Hampshire was, how do you just keep people in the game? How do you provide that relief? And we were really one of the leading states, if not the leading state in the country, for how much money went from that federal package to small businesses in New Hampshire. They very quickly rolled out the Main Street Relief Program that was done through the Governor's Office of Emergency Relief and Recovery, GOFR. Over $400 million to small businesses and nonprofits. And then there was what was called the SELF, which was a similar program for self-employed individuals. And then one of our big priorities was running something called the New Hampshire GAP Fund, which was a $30 million fund, again, funded via that office of the governor, to help get grants to all the small businesses and nonprofits that were kind of falling through the cracks of the other programs, like, well, I didn't qualify for this, or I didn't qualify for this, I'm caught on some technicalities. We wanted to make sure those people were taken care of. And, so we ran that program really well. It kept a lot of especially family-owned businesses in downtowns, alive.
Right, that's important. Great that you bring it up. I'll skip to those questions. I did want to talk about the GAP Fund. How was your team able to determine what businesses or nonprofits fallen through the cracks, as you said?
Yeah, it was an open application. It wasn't first
Okay.
come, first serve. So it was really, if you were one of those businesses or nonprofits, you could apply. It was anyone was allowed to apply, and we would look at it and say, okay, we had all the information on who had already received support from the previous program, so we could say, yeah, you haven't been helped yet, and if you could demonstrate that you were eligible, which really meant either A, your revenue was down from this year compared to last year, or you had new types of COVID-19 expenses, whether PPE or air barriers in your restaurant to keep diners safe, or new types of techniques to route people through alcohol and drug rehabilitation centers to keep the residents safe while they're recovering. Whatever those kind of expenses, those were eligible too. So if you had those kind of challenges, this money, we were able to give it out to you.
Mm. It's a great resource. Do you think there would be another similar fund in 2020 or farther in the future, such as the GAP fund?
I don't know. I don't know if there'll be another state-run grant program or not. So that program and the other programs were made possible through the CARES Act, which came into New Hampshire from the federal government. And I think as of today, I believe the federal House of Representatives is voting on a 1.9 trillion stimulus plan that has quite a bit of money in it for states. And the question is, how much flexibility will states have to use it the way we want versus how much will the feds say you have to use it in this following way? My understanding is there are grant programs in that bill for restaurants, and there are grant programs in that bill for what they call shuttered venues, theaters, things like that. But another very interesting component is a reauthorization of the State Small Business Credit Initiative, or known as SSBCI. It's a $10 billion reauthorization. My back of the napkin math is that New Hampshire will get about 75 million, a proportion of that. And that's money that the BFA has administered before when SSBCI was done post 2008. And it's really a program that provides capital to our organization, which we then can lend to small family-owned businesses around New Hampshire and nonprofits on low interest rate, long-term, patient loans to help people, dig out of the hole. And there are requirements in the bill that actually certain percentages of that money are reserved for businesses owned by women and people of color. And there's also grant money available to provide technical assistance to those businesses who say, I've never applied for anything like this. How do I get through this? It can be a little daunting. Well, there'll be money available to help organizations coach those businesses through the process. So there's actually some pretty substantial programs coming very soon. They might not be the same as previous programs, but they will certainly be helpful.
Absolutely. That sounds like it. Yeah, it's very exciting. I think that goes hand in hand with my question about the BFA's biggest goals for this year, 2021. If that sort of aligns with the programs that you're hoping to introduce very soon.
It does. The past year has all been about absorbing the shock of what COVID-19 has done to the economy. And this next year will be, okay, let's put this in the rearview mirror. Vaccinations are well in New Hampshire. There's more on the way. The economy is opening up. Unemployment rate is going down, but it's not, fixed yet. And there's, plenty of pain still out in the economy and people's families. So how do we pivot from absorbing the shock to truly recovering and coming back to what's always been a really strong economy in New Hampshire? We were fortunate in some ways that we came into this crisis with unemployment at all-time lows, our economic activity at all-time highs, some of the lowest poverty rates in the nation. And that's the result of good thinking and good policies and hard work by businessmen and women all across the state. And I think, a good partner in a small, nimble state government. So we want to help everyone get back where they were, through this recovery.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. So switching gears a little bit, you did mention that sort of attention towards my businesses owned by marginalized people. As we know, the ongoing recession has disproportionately impacted businesses owned by people of color specifically. on a national scale. Does it seem like people of color-owned businesses within the state follow this trend?
I think they do. And I think, I don't have any hard data, but, what I had seen was, it's unfortunate that sometimes awareness of resources tends to kind of follow existing networks, right? And, it's businesses with established banking relationships who are already well networked that are the first to know about resources to help them. And you might have businesses owned by people of color who aren't as well connected, and they don't hear about these resources until it's too late. And that's a big problem. And, when Main Street Relief 2.0 came out and when the Gap Fund came out, there were a lot of steps put into place to reach out into communities of color to make sure people knew that these were available to them. And that actually has gone so far now with these new programs I've talked about, having specific mandates that, certain percentage of this money has to go to them, which I will hope begin to address some of the inequities that are present in the system, quite frankly.
Right, absolutely. At the top of your head, could you think of any other sort of mandates or changes that can be made to sort of address these gaps within business owners or sort of support they receive?
Nothing on the top of my head. I try to stay away from mandates. I instead like to look at it as, instead of mandating that something has to be done, how do we bring the opportunity out in an equitable way? I think that's really what it's about. So how do we establish leadership groups comprised of and in service of people of color, within the state government that both influence policy, but also have access to these resources and really elevate those voices. People aren't left out. I think empowerment and communication and outreach and community building, that's how I like to go, compared to mandates.
Well put, well said. We have some time left, so I was wondering if there are any upcoming resources, opportunities, or messages you'd like to share with our audience.
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind, this is true for all businesses, especially for businesses owned by, people of color. If you're looking for financing or a loan for your business and, either you don't have a bank or your bank has said no, or you're kind of getting lost in the process, you can call us here at the BFA. Part of our job is to work with businesses to help them get the loan they need. And we have a lot of programs, both for large and small companies, that can really get you across the finish line with a loan that you normally wouldn't be able to. And, one example is what's called our Capital Access Program. It's for CAP. It's for loans 200,000 and under. It's a kind of communally funded microcredit program. One way to think about it is when you get a loan, you put a small percentage in an account at a bank. Bank does that, and then we match that amount. And this pool of capital has been built out that the bank can use to offset their loss if the loan doesn't work out. So they use that resource to make these small loans to companies that normally maybe don't have the credit history, maybe they're too new, that normally they couldn't, but now they can. It's a great resource. Thousands of loans get made using it. So if you're having trouble getting financing, you should call us and maybe we can help.
Thank you so much for all your help and expertise. I'm very excited to list all of these resources for our audience. So thank you again for being with us, Executive Director Wallace, and for being our guest on NHLN Opinion Plus this week.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Everyone, please tune in next week for another episode. You can follow us on Twitter at NH Latino News and Instagram at NH_Latino News. I'm Belen Dumont with NHLN Opinion Plus, and I will see you all next time.